Welcome back to the Angmar Project, and today we're going to paint up the orcs we built in our last video. Just like before, I spent a while looking for inspiration before deciding on an overall color scheme. I knew thematically I wanted them to look like a ragtag group of dirty creatures, so I decided to go for a pretty muted scheme, sticking to browns and grays, but still wanted to bring in some cold colors to get across the wintry vibe I was going for. I painted two test models, and while I was happy with them at first, I started to like them less over time and decided I wanted to approach these guys a bit more artistically. One big inspiration for this was Dana Howell, as I really love the look she gets with her painting. The main things I was looking at was the gradient fade between the bases and models and the underpainting with glazes technique. So I went to work painting several more test models using a variety of underpainting and priming techniques and decided on my favorite, which just so happens to be the most complicated one. Great. And with that decided, let's jump right in. Start off, I primed the models blue using a can of primer I bought at the hardware store, and then did a zenithal highlight of lighter brown over top. I really like the colors of both of these, but I'm not sure if I actually recommend them, as I feel like they came out a bit thicker than I wanted, and I can't really tell if that was my fault or the can's. Then, to push the contrast a bit more, I dry brushed the models, focusing on the topmost bits with Citadel's Screaming Skull. Then I painted the bases with Macragge Blue before applying some washes. For the washes, I washed the bottom half in Drakenhof Nightshade and the top half with Agrax Earthshade to once again push the cold to warm color transitions I was going for. Then I went back in and picked out the highest edges with more Screaming Skull to bring them back in before picking out the most important bits like their face details with a bit of pure white. And then I decided to finish off the bases as I was using dry brushing for this, which can be a bit messy. Basically, I just dry brushed them with some Sandry dust, picking out the bigger rocks with Mechanicus Standard Grey, dry brushing the whole thing with a little bit of Screaming Skull and then Pallid Witch Flesh. This basing scheme was inspired by another video I saw recently about making permafrost bases by Wargamer Online, as I really like the blue look this gave the base while still making it semi-realistic. So far, I've been painting all of these in one big batch, but thinking back to my How to Paint Armies videos, I remembered, I hate doing that. So I took my own advice and broke them up into batches of 9 to give myself a better chance. This also meant that I was able to use the first batch as a kind of last test, as I was able to finalize the specific order of operations I would be using for the rest of the army. Once I was finished them and happy with it, I wrote down the process step by step, including all the paint names so that I can always go back if I need more. A couple of things I really tried with these models was to use a pretty limited color palette, sticking to a main selection of base colors and mixing all the highlights myself using a universal highlight color. This kind of got a bit out of control. I ended up using a total of 24 paints, but I feel like the look I wanted still came across. For the color selection, I tried to work dark to light, basically painting all the pants and boots in really dark black Templar and Cygor brown contrast paints, and then moving to lighter and lighter colors of glazes as I went up. For instance, when I used Rhinox Hide, this was always near the bottom, and Xandri Dust was always near the top. I also painted all the leather armor in Mournfang Brown, and most of the other cloth in Mechanicus Standard Grey. I painted all the base colors in single thin coats before washing the whole model in Agrax Earthshade, including the static grass I added. And then I roughly highlighted all the non-metallics back up by mixing in progressively more Screaming Skull until I was happy. It was a bit hit and miss, as I really struggled to get a consistency that I was happy with for the glazing, which both showed the underpainting I had done and also didn't run all over the model. In the end, I definitely think I need to work on this technique a bit more, as I feel like I still relied a bit much on the washes and manual highlights, but I do think the glazing helps keep the undertones showing through in a cool way. I also varied the skin tones between batches to give them all the mismatched look we all like in Middle-earth orcs. I tried to stick with the more grey and sallow skin colors as described by Tolkien, and so used Vallejo Flat Flesh, Dawnstone, Rakosh Flesh, and Pallid Witch Flesh, which I all washed with Reikland Flesh Shade before washing with Agrax Earthshade and highlighting up like the rest of the models. For the metal, I wanted a messy look, and so did a base coat of Lead Belcher followed by a stippling of Mournfang Brown before the Agrax wash, as I find this is a really easy rough technique. Then I did a really rough stippling highlight with Vallejo Plata Silver, either with a bit of sponge or an old brush, before adding some edge and detail highlights. Finally, I painted up the details on the face. I'm a big proponent of painting eyes on all of my models, as I know you don't necessarily see them all the time, but I feel like they really help to bring them all to life when you do. Also, painting them on so many is really great practice. For my eyes, I start by filling in the whole socket with Abaddon Black before adding 2 little dots of Uriel Yellow to either side. I feel like working dark to light is way easier than the opposite, and I use the same techniques with Off-White for my non-Orc models. Also for the mouths, I just dropped in a bit of contrast Flesh Terror's Red, and then picked out the teeth with Screaming Skull. Another new thing I tried out on the last batch was mounting small groups on big popsicle sticks so that I could paint them together without putting each model down individually. I did find this worked pretty efficiently for the base coats, but was trickier for the highlights as it was hard to get to the smaller details. Finally, I finished them all off by pushing the contrast a bit more with some recessed shading, basically going through with some Agrix Earthshade or Nuln Oil depending on the material, and picking out the deepest recesses and divisions, as well as little details like threads and rivets, before going back around each model one last time and picking out some final highlights. To finish it all off, I painted the banner. I spent a while trying to decide on a symbol for my Angmar force, as there's no official ones. Looking around, most of them seem to be either the spiky mountains or just a picture of the Witch King's helmet, neither of which I really like. I wanted something to mix both those spiky looks as well as subtly hint at the Eye of Sauron without just being the eye. I doodled some up myself, but I'm pretty sure the one I finally picked was actually posted somewhere on Facebook, but can't remember where. I also decided to make this blue to stand out from the classic Mordor red. I painted this on the banner using Macragge blue before once again mixing in more and more Screaming Skull for highlights, and then going around the edges with some Draconoth Nightshade to tone it down a bit. I also painted this on a selection of shields, including painting over the red version I did on my test models. And with that done, I just had to rim the bases, put on some tufts, varnish them all, and then all 42 of them were done. While there are a few things I'm not 100% happy with, I do really love these guys. They turned out a little more uniform than I wanted, and I kinda wish the underpainting showed up more, but I do feel like the color choices and kit bashing I did makes them really unique. This did take a bit longer than I expected, as I both wanted to do a good job of them, but also wanted to enjoy the process, as this is one of my dream armies I'm working on, and with that, I think I definitely succeeded. Also, the Witcher and Total War Warhammer definitely didn't help my efficiency.
What? It's technically Warhammer.
Between painting sessions, I also couldn't help myself from doing some more conversions, and so the next episode will be back to some of those. Maybe a bit spookier and deader. So thanks everyone again for all your support. I'm really loving doing this, so please keep commenting, subscribing, following on Twitter and Instagram, and once again, I'm Anders, and have a good one.